Have you ever been the black sheep of your family? The one blamed for every ruined holiday, every stroke of bad luck, until they literally call you cursed? Genevieve was, until a billionaire with crimson eyes crashed her sister's engagement party, dropped to his knees, and changed her life forever. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Boston smelled of white lilies, expensive Joe Malone perfume, and quiet desperation. It was the second Friday in December, and outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow was beginning to blanket the Boston Common in a thick, suffocating layer of white. Inside, however, the air was stifling. Genevieve Sinclair stood as far away from the center of the room as physically possible, pressing her shoulders against the cool silk wallpaper near the service doors. At 24, she had perfected the art of becoming invisible. She wore a simple, high-necked navy gown that cost a fraction of the custom Oscar de la Renta dress her older sister Chloe was currently parading across the dance floor. But then this was Chloe's night. It was an engagement party meant to secure the Sinclair family's legacy, linking them to a prominent Massachusetts political dynasty. Genevieve took a slow sip of her San Pellegrino, keeping her eyes fixed on the ice sculpture in the center of the room. She knew the rules. Stay out of sight. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to the guests. Don't let the curse ruin tonight. Her father, Richard Sinclair, a ruthless real estate developer who owned half of Beacon Hill, had drilled those rules into her head since she was a child. According to the Sinclair family, Genevieve was a walking omen. The label wasn't entirely without evidence. Since she was born, unexplainable, catastrophic bad luck clung to her like a shadow. Her mother had died of a sudden, inexplicable hemorrhage during Genevieve's delivery. When she was 7, a minor electrical glitch burned down the family's summer home in Nantucket while she was sleeping in the parlor. When she was 16, a chandelier at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum inexplicably snapped from its reinforced steel cables, crashing inches away from her and ruining a priceless tapestry. Doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital had run every test in the book, finding nothing wrong with her other than a slightly elevated white blood cell count and a bizarre, unidentifiable protein marker in her plasma. They called her perfectly healthy. Her father, however, called her a liability. Over the years, the family's whispered superstitions hardened into outright hostility. Genevieve was quarantined in the east wing of their estate, hidden from the press, excluded from family portraits, and treated like a radioactive isotope. She was only allowed at the Ritz-Carlton tonight because Chloe insisted it would look suspicious to the press if the bride's only sister was entirely absent. "Look at her," a sharp whisper cut through the jazz band's music. Genevieve didn't have to turn her head to know it was her aunt, Beatrice. Standing in the dark like a ghoul, I told Richard it was a mistake to bring her. If she breaks another mirror or causes a power outage tonight, the senator will call off the wedding. Genevieve tightened her grip on her glass, her knuckles turning white. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the familiar sting of tears. She had spent her entire life apologizing for things she couldn't control. She didn't want to be a magnet for disaster. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would see shifting, unnatural shadows in the corners of her room, cold drafts that felt like icy fingers brushing her spine. She thought she was losing her mind. Suddenly, the jazz band stopped playing. It wasn't a gradual fade out. The musicians abruptly stopped as if the air in their lungs had been physically snatched away. A heavy, unnatural silence descended over the ballroom, thick enough to choke on. The ambient temperature in the room plummeted 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. Genevieve saw the condensation instantly fog up the windows overlooking the common. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung open, There was no announcement, no usher to herald the arrival of the late guest. A man stepped over the threshold, and the entire room seemed to physically tilt toward him. He was staggeringly tall, clad in a flawlessly tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit that looked less like clothing and more like armor. His hair was dark, swept back with a casual elegance, but it was his face that commanded absolute, terrifying attention. He possessed the kind of aristocratic, predatory beauty that made the wealthy socialites of Boston look like unpolished children. His cheekbones were sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes, even from across the room, Genevieve could see them, were an unnatural striking shade of dark amber, bordering on crimson. Genevieve felt a strange, violent tug in her chest. A pull. The San Pellegrino slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. No one looked at her. Every eye in the room was fixed on the stranger. Richard Sinclair practically shoved two state representatives out of his way to reach the man. His usually arrogant face was pale, his hands visibly trembling. "Mr. Montgomery," Richard stammered, offering a hand that the stranger completely ignored. We didn't expect you. Ethelgard Industries are SVP'd with regrets. We are honored. Truly. Alistair Montgomery." The name sent a shock-wave of frantic murmurs through the crowd. He was a phantom billionaire, a private equity titan who supposedly owned half of Manhattan and held the debt of sovereign nations. He rarely appeared in public, managing his empire through heavily encrypted channels and a legion of ruthless lawyers. Alistair did not look at Richard. He didn't look at Chloe, who had rushed forward, tossing her hair and flashing her most practiced, radiant smile. Alistair's gaze was locked across the vast expanse of the ballroom, cutting through the crowd of politicians and socialites, aiming directly at the dark corner by the service doors. Directly at Genevieve. "I am not here for the champagne, Richard." Alistair's voice was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated in the marrow of Genevieve's bones. It held a faint, ancient accent she couldn't place. Something European. Something impossibly old. Before anyone could speak, Alistair began to walk. The crowd parted for him instinctively, like prey making way for an apex predator. He moved with a silent, terrifying grace, his footsteps making zero sound on the marble floor. Genevieve backed up until her spine hit the wall, her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. The shadows around her, the ones that had haunted her since childhood, seemed to writhe and panic, fleeing away from the approaching man. Alistair stopped 2 feet in front of her. Up close, the crimson hue in his eyes wasn't a trick of the light. They were deep, ancient, and burning with an intensity that took Genevieve's breath away. He looked down at her, taking in her simple dress, her terrified posture, the shattered glass at her feet. "Genevieve," he said. It wasn't a question. The way he spoke her name felt like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 24 years. "Mr. Montgomery, please." Richard Sinclair materialized beside them, breathless and panicked. He stepped between Alistair and Genevieve, raising his hands as if to shield the billionaire from a toxic spill. "I apologize profusely. This is my youngest daughter, Genevieve. She's unwell, a bit unstable. We keep her out of the public eye for a reason." Chloe had followed her father, looping her arm through her fiancé's. "She's cursed, Mr. Montgomery," Chloe said, a venomous, sweet smile on her lips. "Truly. Everything she touches breaks. You shouldn't stand so close to her. Let me introduce you to the senator." "Silence!" Alistair didn't shout. He barely raised his voice above a whisper. Yet the command struck the air with the force of a physical blow. Richard snapped his mouth shut, his teeth clicking together so hard Genevieve heard it. Chloe physically recoiled, the colour draining from her perfectly contoured face. Alistair slowly turned his head to look at Richard. "You dare speak of her as if she is a disease?" he asked, the temperature dropping another 5 degrees. The frost on the windows was now creeping up the glass in jagged crystalline spikes. "You, a pathetic, fleeting insect, dare to label her cursed?" Richard gulped, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing air. I only meant to warn you, sir. Terrible things happen around her. Unexplainable things. She brings ruin." Alistair let out a low, dark chuckle that held zero humour. He bypassed Richard completely, stepping into Genevieve's personal space. She trembled, instinctively bracing for the rejection, the disgust, the reprimand she had received every day of her life. Instead, Alistair Montgomery did the unthinkable. In the middle of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, surrounded by the wealthiest, most powerful people in New England, the ruthless CEO of Ethelgard Industries took a step back, parted his tailored suit jacket, and dropped fluidly to one knee. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Several women shrieked. Richard Sinclair looked as if he was having a stroke. Alistair reached out, taking Genevieve's small, shaking hand in his. His skin was incredibly cold, but the moment his fingers brushed hers, a shock of pure, electrifying warmth shot up her arm. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had lived in her chest for 24 years instantly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of absolute safety. He bowed his head, pressing his lips to her knuckles. When he looked up, the crimson in his eyes was blazing. "They call you cursed," Alistair murmured, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "Then curse me too. Bind your ruin to my soul, Genevieve, because I have spent 400 years tearing this world apart, looking for you." Genevieve's mind went blank. 400, she whispered, her voice cracking. Alistair stood up, his height dwarfing her, yet he looked at her as if she were a goddess. He kept her hand locked in his. He turned his attention back to Richard. "Her belongings," Alistair commanded. She doesn't have much," Richard stuttered, utterly broken by the display of power. "Just a coat in the cloakroom. But you can't just take her. She's my daughter. The only liability in this room, Richard," Alistair said, his eyes narrowing into terrifying slits, "is your continued existence." He pulled a sleek, custom-cased iPhone 15 Pro from his inner pocket. He didn't dial. He simply held it up, tapped a single button on an encrypted signal chat, and spoke into the air. "Initiate the hostile takeover of Sinclair Real Estate Holdings. Liquidate their assets by 8 a.m. Monday. Leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs." He slipped the phone away as Richard collapsed to his knees, begging, while Chloe began to hysterically sob. "Come with me." Alistair looked down at Genevieve. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea. Genevieve looked at the father who had locked her away, the sister who had mocked her, and the high society world that had treated her like a monster. Then she looked at the terrifying, beautiful man who had just shattered her cage. She nodded. Alistair led her out of the ballroom. Nobody dared to breathe, let alone stop them. Downstairs, idling by the curb on Avery Street, a matte black Maybach S680 waited, its engine a low, menacing purr. A driver in a pristine black suit opened the rear door. Once inside, the heavy doors shut, sealing them in a cocoon of rich leather and absolute silence. The car pulled away, merging onto the icy streets of Boston, heading south toward New York. Genevieve sat pressed against the far door, her heart racing. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on her. She had just left with a stranger who claimed to be 400 years old. "You're shaking," Alistair noted gently. He reached over, pulling a heavy cashmere blanket from a compartment and draping it over her shoulders. "I know you are terrified, and you have 1,000 questions." "What are you?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "Because humans don't have red eyes, and they don't freeze windows, and they don't live for centuries." Alistair smiled softly, a sad, knowing expression. "No, they don't. I am a vampire, Genevieve. Specifically, the sovereign of the Northern American factions. What your modern folklore would dramatically call a vampire king." Genevieve stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But there was no humor in his face, only absolute sincerity. "Vampires aren't real. This is crazy. I'm having a psychotic break. The curse finally broke my brain." "There is no curse, Genevieve," Alistair said, shifting closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "What you have is a genetic anomaly, a supernatural marker. In my world, it is known as the Rosicrucian strain." "The doctors at Mass General," she muttered, trying to rationalize. "Noticed a protein anomaly in your plasma." "Yes. I own the medical tech conglomerate that supplies their labs. When your blood was tested years ago, the algorithm flagged it and sent the data directly to my servers. It took me years to track you through the Sinclair family's shell corporations, because your father went to such great lengths to hide you away." Alistair looked out the window at the passing snow, his jaw tightening. "Your blood acts as a beacon, a blinding lighthouse in the dark. It attracts the dregs of the supernatural world, lesser demons, starving ghouls, feral vampires. They are drawn to your energy, but they are too weak to directly attack someone with a pure Rosicrucian aura. So they feed on your ambient energy, they manipulate probabilities, they cause accidents, machinery failures, sickness in the people around you." Genevieve felt the breath leave her lungs. "The fire in Nantucket, the chandelier." "Shadow feeders," Alistair confirmed grimly. "Drawn to you, causing chaos because they couldn't consume you directly. Your family blamed you for the bad luck, but you were the only thing keeping those creatures from tearing your family apart." "But why me?" she asked, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Why do I have this?" Alistair reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Because the Rosicrucian strain is the only bloodline capable of bonding with a royal vampire without dying. You are not a cursed human, Genevieve. You are the cure to a centuries-old stagnation. You are a queen." The Maybach sped down the I-95, leaving the frozen, bitter world of her past behind, driving headlong into a terrifying, impossible new reality. The Maybach S680 glided effortlessly through the subterranean garage of 432 Park Avenue, bypassing the standard public elevators for a reinforced, matte black steel lift that required 2 retinal scans and a biometric handprint from Alistair. Genevieve Sinclair stood shivering slightly in her navy Oscar de la Renta gown, feeling completely out of place in this hyper-modern, militarized environment. Alistair Montgomery kept a highly protective stance directly beside her, his terrifying amber eyes scanning the dimly lit concrete walls like a predatory radar system. As the heavy elevator doors sealed them in with a pressurized hiss, the digital display climbed rapidly toward the 96th floor. The penthouse was a sprawling, impenetrable fortress of floor-to-ceiling blast-proof glass overlooking the glittering, icy expanse of Manhattan below. It smelled intensely of ancient parchment, aged Scottish whiskey, and a faint metallic tang that made Genevieve's stomach flutter nervously. "Welcome to my sanctuary," Alistair murmured smoothly, gesturing with one elegant hand toward the massive, sunken living room. It was furnished with imported dark Italian leather sectionals and a roaring 10-foot stone fireplace. Genevieve stepped forward tentatively, her high heels sinking deeply into a plush, midnight blue Persian rug. Suddenly, an imposing figure stepped out from the dense shadows near the vast balcony. He was tall, blonde, and dressed in a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit that perfectly matched Alistair's attire, but his eyes were a terrifying, unnatural shade of icy blue. "So the ridiculous rumors are completely true," the blonde man said, his sharp voice dripping with blatant condescension and venom. "You actually brought the Sinclair anomaly into our heavily fortified home." Alistair's relaxed posture turned instantly rigid, his broad shoulders tensing. "Mind your tone immediately, Cassian. She is royal blood." Cassian openly scoffed, slowly circling them both like a starving vulture sizing up fresh prey. "She is a human battery, Alistair. Nothing more than a walking power source. Look at her trembling." Genevieve instinctively shrank back, the painfully familiar feeling of being a useless burden aggressively washing over her. But Alistair immediately stepped directly between them, his broad chest rumbling with a low, vibrating, primal growl that shook the glass windows. "She is the sole surviving Rosicrucian heir. If you dare to disrespect her again, I will personally rip your fangs out through your throat." Cassian held up his pale hands in a mocking gesture of surrender, but a remarkably cruel smile played on his thin lips. "As you command, my great sire. But the ancient council in London will never approve of this unholy union. They sent me here to ensure the North American faction remains entirely pure." Genevieve gently touched Alistair's muscular arm. "What council?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Alistair's fierce expression softened miraculously as he looked down at her. "The ancient, ruthless, governing body of our kind. They fear the Rosicrucian strain because it supposedly grants a bonded vampire absolute immunity to the devastating sun, to lethal silver, and to death itself. They want your entire bloodline permanently eradicated." Blinding panic forcefully flared in Genevieve's chest. "Then why did you bring me here? To selfishly use me for my blood?" Alistair quickly took both of her shaking hands in his grip surprisingly gentle but intensely desperate. "To fiercely protect you. I have spent 4 long centuries ruthlessly manipulating global financial markets, building a financial fortress impenetrable enough to keep you completely safe from them. I do not want your ancient power. I just want you," he finished softly, his deep voice incredibly raw. The sheer, unadulterated sincerity burning in his crimson eyes made Genevieve's breath sharply hitch in her throat. For the very first time in 24 miserable years, she felt entirely seen and entirely wanted. "I brought you here tonight to offer you a genuine choice," Alistair continued calmly. "Remain human, and I will safely hide you in my most highly secure private estates in Switzerland. Or bond with me, fully share my immortal life, and bravely become the terrifying queen they so desperately fear." Before Genevieve could even attempt to answer his monumental proposal, the reinforced glass windows of the luxurious penthouse violently exploded inward. Thousands of razor-sharp, glittering shards heavily rained down upon the Persian rug, as heavily armed, masked figures forcefully rappelled into the pristine living room from the roof above. Council assassins! Alistair fiercely roared, immediately shoving Genevieve safely behind the massive, heavy marble kitchen island. The mysterious intruders wore advanced black tactical gear, heavily armed with glowing ultraviolet rifles and wickedly curved titanium blades. Cassian suddenly laughed loudly, a deeply cruel, hollow, echoing sound. I'm truly sorry, Alistair. The London Council officially offered me the North American throne if I eliminate the girl. Cassian quickly drew a gleaming silver dagger from his jacket and violently lunged forward. Absolute chaos instantly erupted in the penthouse. Alistair moved significantly faster than any human eye could possibly track, effortlessly snapping the thick neck of the first heavily armed assassin before the man's boots even touched the floor. He ruthlessly threw the lifeless body directly into the roaring fireplace. Deafening gunfire completely shattered the elegant penthouse decor, bright purple ultraviolet lasers dangerously singing the expensive walls and destroying priceless art. Genevieve tightly covered her sensitive ears, squeezing her eyes shut as the familiar dark shadows in the room began violently writhing and twisting around her trembling body. The mysterious shadows weren't just fleeing in blind panic anymore. They were aggressively attacking. A deeply primal, ancient instinct suddenly awakened within Genevieve's supernatural blood. The supposedly unexplainable destructive curse that had miserably ruined her entire mortal life was suddenly manifesting as a highly lethal protective weapon. A massive, dark, kinetic shockwave violently rippled outward from her pale skin, forcefully knocking a second, heavily armed assassin completely through a solid concrete structural pillar. "Genevieve!" Alistair loudly yelled over the deafening noise, cleanly decapitating a third brutal attacker with his bare, bloodied hands. He was absolutely magnificent and deeply terrifying, resembling a ruthless god of war, violently bathed in the pale moonlight. But the traitorous Cassian was incredibly stealthy. He completely bypassed Alistair's defensive perimeter, smoothly slipping through the highly chaotic, bloody melee. His gleaming silver dagger was aimed squarely and lethally at Genevieve's wildly beating chest. "Time to finally die, you pathetic anomaly," Cassian cruelly sneered, raising the deadly blade high above his head. Genevieve entirely froze, but the writhing, dark shadows immediately surged forward, aggressively wrapping tightly around Cassian's right wrist like burning iron chains. He screamed in absolute agony as the dark, volatile energy severely burned his supposedly immortal, invulnerable skin. Alistair materialized directly beside them in a mere microsecond. He furiously grabbed the screaming Cassian by his pale throat, effortlessly hoisting the traitor completely off the ruined floor. "You foolishly betrayed your true king," Alistair aggressively whispered, his deep voice vibrating with absolute, lethal intent. Without a single moment of hesitation, he violently plunged his right hand directly into Cassian's chest, brutally tearing out his blackened, treacherous heart. Cassian instantly turned to fine grey ash, completely dusting the pristine hardwood floor. The remaining two assassins, completely horrified after witnessing the brutal death of their newly appointed leader, desperately tried to aggressively flee toward the broken windows. They didn't make it even 3 steps. In mere seconds, the ruined penthouse was entirely, eerily silent once again, save for the howling winter wind rushing in. Alistair slowly turned to face Genevieve. He was lightly covered in grey ash and dark blood, his blazing crimson eyes glowing more intensely than ever before. He smoothly dropped to his bloody knees directly before her, just as he dramatically had at the Ritz-Carlton mere hours ago. "Are you severely injured?" he urgently asked, his cold hands frantically checking her bare arms and pale face for any hidden wounds. "No," she breathlessly gasped, willingly falling to her knees to closely meet him amidst the destruction. The dark shadows, they actively protected me. Alistair proudly smiled. "Your true, ancient power is finally awakening. The Rosicrucian blood inherently recognizes a lethal threat." He looked incredibly deeply into her wide, awe-struck eyes. "Genevieve, the ruthless London Council will absolutely never stop. They will relentlessly send massive armies. I simply cannot protect you forever unless we fully share our combined strength." "How?" she bravely asked, her voice surprisingly steady and deeply resolved. The frightened, perpetually invisible girl from Beacon Hill was permanently dead. In her very place sat a remarkably powerful woman who had just successfully weaponized the pure darkness. "The sacred blood oath," Alistair seriously explained. "I deeply drink your powerful life force, and you subsequently drink my ancient immortality. We fundamentally become one entirely singular entity. But it will hurt tremendously, and there is absolutely no turning back once we begin." Genevieve slowly reached up, gently tracing the sharp, flawless line of his cold jaw. "My arrogant family ruthlessly threw me away. The entire world consistently treated me exactly like a hideous monster. If they truly want to treat me like a monster, Alistair, then please let me gladly be the most terrifying, unstoppable monster they ever forcefully face." Alistair's glowing eyes significantly darkened with incredibly fierce, consuming passion. He forcefully pulled her tightly against his broad, solid chest. "Then successfully curse me, Genevieve." He gently tilted her head completely back, fully exposing her highly vulnerable, pulsing throat. His sharp fangs slowly descended, incredibly sharp and gleaming bright white. He bit down hard. Pain, incredibly sharp and completely blinding, violently exploded deep in her neck, but it was almost immediately replaced by a massively rushing, overwhelming wave of deeply euphoric, burning heat. She clearly felt her fragile, mortal weakness rapidly draining away, completely replaced by an incredibly intoxicating, massive, ancient power. Alistair quickly pulled back, aggressively biting his own thick wrist until dark, incredibly thick, potent blood quickly welled up. "Drink deeply," he softly commanded. Genevieve desperately pressed her lips to his torn wrist. The immortal blood tasted exactly like rich, dark wine. It deeply tasted like crushed black velvet and raw, crackling electricity. The exact moment the potent liquid hit her tongue, her mortal senses completely shattered and exponentially expanded. Her vision drastically shifted, expanding infinitely outward. She could perfectly hear the tiny snowflakes silently hitting the frozen streets 96 floors below them. She could distinctly feel the rapid heartbeat of every single living creature residing within Manhattan. The dark shadows lingering in the ruined room respectfully bowed to her, smoothly wrapping closely around her bare shoulders, exactly like a royal protective cloak. Her heart completely stopped beating with a weak, mortal rhythm, permanently settling into a surprisingly slow, incredibly powerful, immortal thrum. When she finally opened her eyes again, she quickly caught her new reflection in a large, unbroken pane of glass. Her eyes were no longer soft brown. They were brightly burning crimson. Alistair proudly stood, effortlessly pulling her up closely with him. He passionately kissed her, a deeply claiming, wonderfully desperate kiss that permanently sealed their unbreakable bond. "My beautiful queen," he softly murmured directly against her lips. The very next morning, the elite financial world of Boston abruptly woke up to an absolute massacre. Just as Alistair had strictly ordered, Ethelgard Industries brutally and ruthlessly absorbed Sinclair real estate holdings. Genevieve sat comfortably on the edge of the plush master bed, casually holding a new iPad Pro. She calmly watched the live Bloomberg terminal feed as her terrible father's massive net worth aggressively plummeted to absolute zero. Richard Sinclair was officially declared bankrupt, actively facing massive federal investigations for deep embezzlement that Alistair's elite hackers had conveniently exposed directly to the demanding FBI. Chloe's ambitious political fiancé had immediately cancelled the lavish wedding, cowardly fleeing the massive public scandal. The cruel family that had heartlessly banished her to the lonely shadows was now completely destroyed by them. Genevieve felt absolutely no lingering pity, only a remarkably cold, deeply immortal satisfaction. Alistair casually walked into the bright bedroom, gently handing her a beautiful crystal glass completely filled with a highly advanced synthetic blood substitute they privately manufactured at Mass General. "The terrified London Council has officially called for an immediate emergency parley," he happily announced, his deep voice heavily laced with remarkably dark, vindictive amusement. They clearly heard exactly what brutally happened to Cassian. Genevieve slowly took a long sip from the delicate glass, her bright crimson eyes violently flashing. "Tell them to immediately prepare their total surrender," she beautifully smiled, "or we will aggressively bring the shadows directly to London." Alistair laughed loudly, a deeply rich, booming sound that entirely filled the massive penthouse. He lovingly kissed the top of her dark head. "Exactly as you wish, my dark love. We immediately fly to Heathrow at midnight." Genevieve looked out over the sprawling, brilliantly sunlit city of New York. The bright sun no longer burned her delicate skin. The Rosicrucian strain made her completely invincible. She was no longer Genevieve Sinclair, the cursed outcast. She was Genevieve Montgomery, the terrifying vampire queen of North America. She had truly found her immortal king, completely embraced her ancient curse, and together they were absolutely going to ruthlessly conquer the entire immortal world. Did you love this dark, twisting tale of betrayal, immortal romance, and absolute revenge? If you want to see Genevieve and Alistair conquer the ancient London Council, you need to stick around. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow vampire romance fans, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more epic, real-life, supernatural drama. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us create more thrilling stories. Drop a comment,